In the heart of a seemingly peaceful town, a simple meal denied set off a chain reaction that would unravel deep-seated divisions. What started as a confrontation between a war veteran and a diner owner soon became a battle for the soul of the community. But as secrets surfaced and unlikely alliances formed, no one could predict who would ultimately lead the way to healing. Let's stick around to find out. But before we dive into the story, comment below where you're watching from today. If you enjoy this tale, don't forget to subscribe. The late afternoon sun cast a warm, golden glow over the sleepy town of Harvick, its cobblestone streets winding lazily between rows of pastel-painted houses. The town was quiet, a kind of quiet that only small towns seem to master, broken only by the occasional laughter of children or the clinking of cups at the local cafe. For Ibrahim Malik, the walk down Harvick's main street was one he took almost every day after work. Dressed in his worn leather jacket and carrying his carpenter's toolkit, he was a familiar sight to the locals. Some nodded at him as he passed, while others avoided his gaze, their smiles fading too quickly. He had grown used to the mixed reactions, brushing them off with a resilience forged in fire. Ibrahim had lived in Harvick for over 20 years. He had built furniture for nearly every home in town and served the country he now called his own during a grueling war overseas. Yet, he was always reminded in subtle and not-so-subtle ways that to some, he was still an outsider. Today, he decided to treat himself. The savory aroma of grilled meats wafting from Olaf's Grill, a cozy family-owned diner, called to him like a siren. He pushed open the heavy oak door, and the bell overhead jingled softly. Inside, the place was unchanged. Wooden tables, old photographs of Harvick's early days on the walls, and the faint hum of jazz playing on the radio. He had been here dozens of times before, enjoying the warm hospitality of Olaf Lindström, the gruff but dependable owner. But something was off today. The usual murmur of conversation fell silent as Ibrahim entered. Heads turned. A fork clattered against a plate. It wasn't the kind of curious silence he had felt when he first moved to Harvick. This was heavier, colder. Shrugging off the unease, Ibrahim walked to the counter and smiled at Olaf, who stood behind it, wiping a glass. "Good evening, Olaf. The usual, please." Olaf didn't respond immediately. His hands stilled, and his pale blue eyes met Ibrahim's. But instead of the warmth Ibrahim was used to, there was something else, something hard and distant. We're closed," Olaf muttered, his voice low. Ibrahim frowned and glanced around. Customers were still eating, their plates only half empty. The smell of freshly grilled lamb was unmistakable. "Closed? It doesn't seem like it." Olaf placed the glass down, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the edge of the counter. "I said we're closed. For you." The words struck like a physical blow. Ibrahim's smile faltered, his confusion quickly replaced by disbelief. "For me? Olaf, I don't understand. Did I do something to offend you?" Olaf's face hardened further, his jaw tightening. "Look, I don't want trouble. Just leave, and don't come back." The silence in the diner was deafening now. Ibrahim could feel the weight of every gaze, the whispers that would surely follow. A flush of heat rose in his cheeks, but he held his ground. "Olaf, you and we've known each other for years. I've always respected you. Why this now?" Olaf's voice rose, sharp and cutting. "Because people like you don't belong here. That's why." The words hung in the air, venomous and final. Ibrahim stood frozen, his heart pounding. He wasn't just hurt, he was angry. He had fought for this country, bled for it, only to be dismissed like this in a town he considered home. Without another word, he turned on his heel and walked out, the jingle of the bell marking his departure. Outside, the air felt colder, the golden glow of the sun suddenly harsh and unforgiving. Ibrahim sat on a bench nearby, staring at his hands. They were rough, calloused from years of honest work. What had he done to deserve this? Unbeknownst to him, someone had been watching. Nina Anderson, a university student visiting her family for the holidays, had witnessed the entire exchange from a corner booth. Her heart pounded as she fumbled with her phone, quickly typing out a post on social media. Witnessed something terrible today at Olaf's Grill. A local veteran was denied service purely because of who he is. This is not okay. Harvick, we need to do better. She hesitated for a moment, her finger hovering over the post button. But then, with a deep breath, she hit it. The post was live. And with it, a chain reaction was set into motion, one that would change Harvick forever. By the time Ibrahim returned home to his modest cottage on the outskirts of Harvick, he was weighed down by more than just the tools in his bag. The sting of Olaf's words replayed in his mind, sharp and unrelenting. Yet, as he stepped through the door, the familiar warmth of home offered some solace. "Baba, you're back," called his daughter, Amal Malik, from the kitchen. She sat at the wooden table, surrounded by her laptop, a stack of notes, and the smell of freshly brewed tea. Ibrahim managed a small smile. "Yes, Amal. A long day, but I got through it." Amal's sharp eyes caught the unease in his expression. "What happened?" "Nothing worth discussing," Ibrahim replied, hanging up his jacket. He knew his daughter well enough to expect her persistence, but he wasn't ready to relive the humiliation. "Baba," she said gently, standing to face him. "You look upset. Talk to me." Ibrahim hesitated, but Amal's unwavering gaze finally wore him down. He recounted the incident at Olaf's Grill, his words quiet yet charged with hurt. As he spoke, Amal's face hardened, her fists clenching at her sides. He said, "What? After everything you've done for this town? For this country?" "It's not the first time I've faced this kind of treatment," Ibrahim said, his voice calm despite the storm inside him. "I can't change how some people think. But you don't have to stay silent, either," Amal countered. Her voice was steady but filled with fire. "People like Olaf need to be held accountable." Before Ibrahim could respond, Amal's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at the screen, her brow furrowing. Then her expression shifted into something more urgent. "Baba," she said, holding up the phone. "Look at this." On the screen was a social media post from someone named Nina Anderson. The caption read, "Witnessed something awful today at Olaf's Grill. A local veteran, yes, a man who served this country, was denied service because of who he is. This is not okay. Harvick, we need to do better." Underneath, the post had thousands of comments. Some supported Nina's call for justice, while others dismissed her as overreacting. The debate was fierce, and it was clear the post had struck a nerve. "I didn't even know anyone was paying attention," Ibrahim murmured. "Well, now they are," Amal said firmly. "This isn't just about you, Baba. It's about standing up for what's right." Across town, Olaf's Grill was far quieter than usual. Olaf Lindstrom stood behind the counter, scrolling through his phone. The post had reached him, too, and his jaw tightened with each new notification. "Olaf, this doesn't look good," said his younger brother, Johan, gesturing to his own phone. "People are talking about boycotting the diner." Olaf grunted, placing his phone down with a heavy thud. "Let them talk. I won't let anyone tell me how to run my business." But as the hours passed and fewer customers walked through the door, a knot of unease began to form in Olaf's stomach. He prided himself on being a fixture in the town, someone whose diner was a symbol of tradition. Now he could feel that foundation cracking. By the next morning, the situation had escalated. A small crowd had gathered outside Olaf's Grill, holding signs that read "No to Hate" and "Equality for All." Amal stood among them, her expression resolute. By her side was Nina, the young woman who had started the firestorm with her post. "I didn't think my post would spread like this," Nina admitted, glancing nervously at the growing crowd. Amal gave her an encouraging nod. Sometimes, the truth has a way of resonating with people. Nina hesitated, then asked, "What do we do now? A protest is one thing, but if we really want to make a difference, we need to go further," Amal said thoughtfully. Her journalist instincts were kicking in. "This town needs more than anger. It needs to see that we're building something better." Inside the diner, Olaf peeked through the blinds, his face pale. The chants outside were growing louder. He turned to Johann, who sat silently at one of the tables. "This is ridiculous," Olaf said, pacing. "I'm being painted as some kind of villain." Johann looked up, his face unreadable. "Maybe you should talk to them." "And say what?" Olaf snapped. "That I have the right to refuse service to whoever I want? Do you?" Johann's quiet question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Olaf turned away, unwilling to answer. Later that evening, back at the Malik household, Amal sat across from Ibrahim, her laptop glowing faintly in the dim light. "I think we need to take this further," Amal said. "I told you, Amal, I don't want to cause trouble," Ibrahim said tiredly. "This isn't about trouble, Baba," Amal replied. "It's about creating change. What if we turn Olaf's grill into something else? A place that brings people together instead of dividing them?" Ibrahim raised an eyebrow. "You mean, buy it?" "Yes," Amal said, her voice gaining strength. "If Olaf won't change his ways, then maybe it's time the diner itself changed. A space for unity, for culture, for healing. What do you think?" Ibrahim was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he nodded. "If it means no one else has to feel what I felt, then let's do it." Amal's lips curved into a determined smile. The plan was forming, and Harvik was about to witness a transformation it never saw coming. By the time Amal and Ibrahim arrived at Olaf's grill the following morning, the small crowd from the day before had doubled. People held signs, their voices merging into chants that echoed down Harvik's quiet streets. Some stood in solidarity, others merely spectated, but the tension was palpable. Amal scanned the crowd and spotted Nina near the front, holding a sign that read, "Harvik for all." She waved Amal over, her face both excited and nervous. "I think this is working," Nina said as Amal approached. "The town's paying attention." Amal nodded but kept her focus on the diner's window. Behind the blinds, she caught a glimpse of Olaf's silhouette pacing back and forth. "It's not enough to just protest," Amal replied. "We need to face him directly." Nina hesitated. "Are you sure he'll even listen?" "He doesn't have to listen," Amal said, determination hardening her voice. "But he needs to hear the truth." Inside the diner, Olaf's mood had gone from frustration to dread. Every so often, he peeked through the blinds at the crowd. They weren't leaving, and each new voice seemed to chip away at his defenses. "I don't understand why they care so much," Olaf muttered, his voice gruff as he wiped the counter with unnecessary force. "Maybe because it's not just about you," Johann said quietly, standing by the door. "It's about what you did, and what it says about this town." Olaf shot him a sharp look. "Whose side are you on, Johann?" Johann sighed but didn't answer. The sound of the diner door opening startled them both. Olaf turned to see Amal and Ibrahim stepping inside. The chanting from outside seemed to quiet, as if the crowd had paused to watch this pivotal moment unfold. "What are you doing here?" Olaf asked, his voice defensive. "We came to talk," Amal said, her tone calm but firm. "You owe my father an explanation." Olaf's eyes darted to Ibrahim, who stood silently beside his daughter, his weathered face a mask of quiet strength. "I don't owe him anything," Olaf snapped, though his voice lacked conviction. Amal stepped closer. "You think you can treat people however you want and face no consequences? This isn't just about my father. It's about the message you're sending to everyone in this town. Is that the legacy you want to leave behind?" Olaf's jaw tightened. "You don't understand. This place, it's all I have left. My father built it with his bare hands. He believed in keeping Harvik, not letting outsiders come in and change it." Amal's eyes narrowed. "Your father may have built this place, but you're the one tearing it apart." Olaf flinched at her words, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. "I'm not going to apologize for protecting what's mine." "You think you're protecting something?" Amal asked, her voice rising. "You're clinging to walls that should have come down long ago. You don't see the humanity in people like my father because you've chosen not to look." Olaf's gaze flicked to Ibrahim, who finally spoke for the first time. "Olaf, years ago I fought for this country. I bled for it. I didn't do that to be treated like a stranger in my own town. There was a beat of silence as Olaf processed Ibrahim's words. The memory of a different time, long buried, surfaced. Olaf's voice softened, though it was tinged with bitterness. Do you remember me? Ibrahim tilted his head, confused. I'm not sure what you mean. Years ago, Olaf began, his voice faltering. I was in an accident. My car skidded off the road during a snowstorm. A man pulled me out before the car caught fire. That man was you, wasn't it? Ibrahim's eyes widened. The memory came rushing back. A stormy night, the screech of tires, and the frantic effort to save a stranger's life. He nodded slowly. Yes, Ibrahim said. That was me. Olaf's face twisted with conflicting emotions. Shame flickered in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by a stubborn glare. And now you think I owe you something for that? I never asked for anything, Ibrahim replied evenly. But maybe you should ask yourself why you're so quick to turn against someone who once saved your life. Amal seized the moment. Olaf, we're not here to destroy what your family built. We're here to build something better. You want to protect your father's legacy? Then let's transform this diner into a place that brings people together instead of dividing them. Olaf frowned. What are you saying? I'm saying we'll buy the diner, Amal said, her voice steady. We'll keep its spirit alive, but in a way that reflects the Harvik of today. A place where everyone, locals and newcomers, can belong. Olaf stared at her, his expression unreadable. The weight of the proposition hung in the air. And what happens to me? He asked bitterly. Amal softened her tone. You can stay, as head chef. Help us rebuild this place. Not just with your hands, but with your heart. Olaf didn't answer immediately. The room seemed to shrink as he wrestled with himself. Memories of his father's stern lessons on tradition clashed with the undeniable truth of what he had done. Finally, Johan spoke. Olaf, maybe it's time to let go of the past. Harvik isn't the same town it was when Dad was alive. And maybe that's a good thing. Olaf looked at his brother, then back at Ibrahim and Amal. He exhaled slowly, his shoulders slumping. Fine, he said quietly. But don't expect me to change overnight. We're not asking for overnight, Amal said, a small smile breaking through. We're asking for the first step. The crowd outside erupted into cheers as Amal and Ibrahim stepped out, their faces alight with quiet triumph. Change was coming to Harvik, one step at a time. The morning sun rose over Harvik, its golden light spilling across the cobblestone streets and the now quiet facade of Olaf's grill. The previous day's confrontation still lingered in the minds of everyone who had been there. For Olaf, it was the first restless night in years. A night filled with memories, regrets, and questions he wasn't sure he could answer. Inside the diner, Olaf sat at a table near the window, staring at a steaming cup of coffee. Johan leaned against the counter, silently watching his brother. You going to tell me what's on your mind? Johan asked finally. Olaf sighed, rubbing his temples. Do you think I made the right decision? Johan gave a small shrug. I think you made the only decision you could if you want to keep this place standing. But you've got to decide what you want it to mean. Olaf's gaze shifted to the mural on the opposite wall, a painting his father had commissioned decades ago. It depicted Harvik's early days. Settlers building homes, farmers working the fields, and the first iteration of Olaf's grill. It was meant to symbolize the strength and unity of the town, but now it felt like a relic of a past that no longer fit. Across town, Amal and Ibrahim were deep in discussion. We need to act fast, Amal said, her fingers flying across the keyboard of her laptop. The longer we wait, the harder it'll be to keep momentum. People are talking now. We need to show them that this isn't just about a protest, it's about progress. And what's your plan? Ibrahim asked, his voice calm but curious. Amal turned the laptop toward him. On the screen was a detailed proposal. A complete renovation of Olaf's grill, rebranding it as Unity Bistro. It's simple, Amal said, her voice steady with determination. We turn the diner into a cultural hub. The menu will reflect the diversity of Harvik. dishes inspired by the people who live here. We'll host events that bring the community together. Storytelling nights, cooking classes, even forums to discuss the town's future. Ibrahim scanned the proposal, a mixture of pride and hesitation in his expression. It's ambitious, but do you think Olaf will really go for it? Amal smiled faintly. He doesn't have to love it. He just has to see that it's his best option. Later that day, Amal and Ibrahim returned to Olaf's grill, this time not as adversaries but as collaborators. The diner was empty except for Olaf and Johan, who were cleaning up after the morning rush, or what was left of it. Olaf glanced up as they entered, his expression guarded. "You're back." Amal nodded. "We are, and we've come with a plan." She set her laptop on the counter, turning it to face Olaf and Johan. "This is what we want to do with the diner. If you agree to sell, we'll keep the spirit of this place alive, but in a way that reflects the Harvik of today." Olaf looked at the screen, his brow furrowing as he read through the proposal. The words Unity Bistro stood out, bold and hopeful. "You want to turn this into some kind of multicultural cafe?" he asked, his voice laced with skepticism. "It's more than that," Amal explained. "It's about creating a space where people from all walks of life can come together. A place that celebrates what makes Harvik unique while honoring its roots." Olaf's gaze flicked to Ibrahim. "And you're on board with this?" Ibrahim met his eyes evenly. "I am. I believe this town can be better than what we've seen these past few days. But it's up to us to lead by example." For a long moment, the room was silent. Johan leaned over Olaf's shoulder, studying the proposal with interest. "You know," Johan said, his voice thoughtful, "this could work, and it might just save the diner." Olaf shot him a glare but didn't argue. Instead, he closed the laptop gently and looked at Amal. "If I agree to this, I want to stay. As head chef, this is still my family's legacy, and I'm not ready to walk away from it." Amal smiled, relief washing over her. "Deal. But this isn't just about running a kitchen, Olaf. It's about running a place that brings people together. Are you ready for that?" Olaf hesitated, then gave a reluctant nod. "I'll try." That night, Amal received an unexpected call from a local historian. "I heard about your plans for the diner," the woman said, her voice warm and excited. "There's something you should know. Something that might make this project even more meaningful." "What is it?" Amal asked, intrigued. The original Olaf's Grill wasn't just a diner. It was built on the site of a gathering place where the town's earliest settlers, both locals and immigrants, would come together to share meals and stories. It was a symbol of unity, long before it became a restaurant. Amal's heart raced. "Are you saying this place has always been about bringing people together?" "Exactly," the historian replied. "It's in the foundation, both literally and figuratively." The next morning, Amal shared the discovery with Ibrahim and Olaf. For the first time, Olaf seemed genuinely moved. "This place was always meant to be about unity," he murmured, his voice tinged with regret. "Maybe it's time I remembered that." "Maybe it is," Ibrahim said, clapping him gently on the shoulder. As the group began planning the diner's transformation, it was clear that they weren't just rebuilding a business. They were rebuilding a community. The transformation of Olaf's Grill into Unity Bistro was anything but smooth. Renovations had barely begun, and already the town's gossip mill was in overdrive. Some residents were thrilled by the prospect of a fresh start, while others whispered behind closed doors about how Olaf had betrayed tradition. For Olaf, each day was a test of his resolve. The diner had been his father's pride and joy, a symbol of their family's contribution to Harvik. Yet now, Olaf found himself questioning the ideals he had clung to for so long. One afternoon, as construction workers tore down the old signage from the diner's facade, Olaf sat on the curb, watching the debris pile up. Ibrahim joined him, 2 steaming cups of coffee in hand. He offered one to Olaf, who accepted it wordlessly. "You're quiet today," Ibrahim said after a long pause. "Just thinking," Olaf muttered. He stared at the cracked pavement beneath his feet before turning to Ibrahim. "How do you do it?" "Do what?" "Carry all of this." "Grace," Olaf said, his voice heavy. "After everything people like me have done. After everything I've done. You sit here, calm as anything, like none of it touches you." Ibrahim sipped his coffee, the steam curling around his face. "It touches me," he said finally. "But I've lived long enough to know that carrying anger doesn't make the weight lighter. If I let it consume me, I'd be no different than the hate I've faced." Olaf looked away, guilt tightening his chest. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "Maybe not," Ibrahim said gently. "But forgiveness isn't about what you deserve. It's about what we choose to give." While the renovations progressed, Amal worked tirelessly to rally the community. She organized forums and events, inviting residents to share their hopes and concerns about the project. One night, the small community hall was packed to capacity. Amal stood at the front, facing a sea of skeptical faces. "I know change can be uncomfortable," she began, her voice steady but impassioned. "But Unity Bistro isn't about erasing Harvick's history. It's about honoring it by embracing the diversity that has always been a part of this town." A hand shot up in the crowd. It belonged to Gerda Lund, one of Harvick's oldest residents. "What do you know about this town's history, young lady? You've only been here a few weeks." Amal smiled warmly. "You're right, Gerda. I wasn't born here. But did you know that the original site of Olaf's Grill was once a meeting place for settlers and newcomers? A place where people shared meals and stories, no matter where they came from?" The room fell silent. Amal let the weight of her words settle before continuing. "Unity Bistro isn't a new idea. It's a return to what Harvick was meant to be. And I believe we can build something beautiful together." In the days that followed, Amal received an envelope in the mail. Inside was an old, weathered photograph of the original gathering place, along with a note. "You're right. This town was built on unity. It's time we remember that. G.L." Amal smiled at the initials, knowing that Gerda Lund, despite her skepticism, was beginning to come around. The turning point for Olaf came during a cooking session with Ibrahim. The two men stood side by side in the kitchen, testing recipes for the new menu. Olaf worked silently, his usual gruff demeanor intact, but Ibrahim sensed a shift. As they prepared a dish inspired by Ibrahim's Middle Eastern roots, Olaf hesitated. "You know," he said, clearing his throat, "my father taught me everything I know about this kitchen, but he also taught me to fear change." Ibrahim looked at him, his expression kind but curious. "I've been holding onto his lessons like they're gospel," Olaf continued. "But maybe he wasn't always right." Ibrahim nodded. "It's not easy to unlearn what we've been taught, but it's never too late to try." That evening, Olaf surprised everyone by announcing that he wanted to add a signature dish to the Unity Bistro menu. A dish that combined flavors from his Swedish heritage with spices from Ibrahim's culture. "It's a start," Olaf said quietly, as the team applauded. The final piece of the transformation was the mural. Amal commissioned a local artist to paint a vibrant scene on the diner's largest wall. A group of people from different backgrounds, sharing a meal at a long, communal table. At the center of the mural were two figures, one unmistakably modeled after Olaf's father, the other after a young Ibrahim. Their hands clasped in friendship. The image was a powerful reminder of what the diner stood for. The unveiling of the mural drew a crowd larger than anyone had anticipated. Olaf stood near the back, his hands shoved into his pockets, as Amal addressed the gathering. "This mural isn't just art," Amal said. "It's a promise. A promise that this town can be more than its past, that we can be a place where everyone belongs." As the crowd applauded, Olaf found himself wiping at his eyes, blaming the wind. The Unity Bistro opened its doors the following week to an outpouring of support. The menu featured dishes from every corner of Harvick's cultural tapestry, and the atmosphere buzzed with excitement. But as Amal and Ibrahim watched Olaf greet customers with a tentative smile, they knew the real work was just beginning. Change, after all, was never easy. But in Harvick, it had finally taken root. The grand opening of Unity Bistro was nothing short of electric. Harvick's main street, typically quiet on a weeknight, was alive with the chatter of townsfolk eager to see the diner's transformation. From the moment the doors opened, the lines stretched around the block. A mix of longtime residents, curious newcomers, and even skeptics who had come to see if the change was more than just a new coat of paint. Amal stood by the entrance, greeting guests as they entered. Her smile was warm but not without nerves. Beside her, Ibrahim adjusted his jacket, scanning the crowd with a mixture of pride and trepidation. Inside, Olaf moved through the kitchen with surprising ease. The once gruff owner now found himself instructing a diverse team of cooks and servers. While he barked the occasional order, his tone carried a softer edge. His decision to stay as head chef had been met with mixed reactions, but tonight, he seemed determined to prove he was worthy of the second chance he'd been given. The first wave of guests marveled at the new interior. Gone were the dated wooden panels and faded photographs. In their place were vibrant murals, communal tables, and displays of Harvick's history, both its roots and its evolving identity. But the heart of the transformation was the wall-sized mural. Conversations hushed as people gathered around it, taking in the image of two men, one modeled after Olaf's father, the other after a young Ibrahim, sharing a handshake over a table laden with food. The surrounding figures represented Harvick's diversity, from settlers to modern-day residents, united by their shared humanity. Gerda Lund, the town's most vocal skeptic, was among those staring at the mural. Her sharp gaze softened as she turned to Amal. "You were right," she murmured. "This place has always been about unity. We just forgot." Amal smiled, a flicker of relief in her eyes. As the evening progressed, Olaf emerged from the kitchen carrying a steaming platter of food. He set it down on the largest table, where Amal, Ibrahim, and several guests were seated. "This," Olaf announced, "is something special." The dish was a twist on a classic Swedish recipe, a savory stew infused with the rich spices of the Middle East. As plates were passed around and forks clinked against porcelain, murmurs of delight rippled through the room. "What's the story behind this?" Ibrahim asked, his curiosity piqued. Olaf hesitated before answering. "It's an old recipe my father used to make. I found it in one of his journals while we were clearing out the office. He wrote about trying it with a friend from a different background." His voice faltered slightly. "I think that friend might have been you." The room fell silent as Ibrahim leaned back, memories of shared meals and laughter during the early years of his arrival washing over him. "Your father always did have an adventurous palate," he said with a soft chuckle. Olaf's lips curved into a faint smile. "I guess he wasn't as stuck in his ways as I thought." Over the next few weeks, Unity Bistro became more than a place to eat. It became a place to connect. Guests lingered at communal tables, striking up conversations with people they might never have spoken to before. One evening, Ibrahim noticed Lars Anders, a local farmer known for his outspoken resistance to change, sitting with a group of younger patrons. To his surprise, Lars was laughing, gesturing animatedly as he recounted stories of Harvick's early days. As Ibrahim approached, Lars looked up. "This place? It's not bad," Lars admitted gruffly. "Doesn't feel like it's mine anymore, but maybe that's okay." "It's still yours," Ibrahim replied, placing a hand on Lars's shoulder. "It just belongs to everyone else, too." One morning, Amal received a package in the mail. Inside was a letter addressed to Olaf, along with a photograph of two young men. One clearly Olaf's father and the other a man who looked strikingly similar to Ibrahim. The letter read, "Dear Olaf, I hope this letter finds its way to you. I've been following the news of Unity Bistro and couldn't help but think of your father. He would have been proud of what you've done. When I think back to the meals we shared and the dreams we had for Harvick, it's clear that you've carried those dreams forward in a way neither of us could have imagined. Best wishes, a friend." Amal handed the letter to Olaf, who read it in silence. When he looked up, there was a glimmer of something new in his eyes. Gratitude, perhaps, or hope. Unity Bistro's impact began to ripple beyond Harvick. Word spread about the diner that turned prejudice into progress, drawing visitors from neighboring towns. Some came out of curiosity, others to witness what was possible when a community chose unity over division. Amal worked tirelessly to document the stories that emerged from Unity Bistro. Veterans shared meals with immigrants, older residents learned about new traditions, and young people found mentors among their elders. One particularly moving moment came when Olaf, unprompted, joined a table of newcomers. As they laughed and shared stories, it became clear that Olaf was no longer just the man who had made a mistake. He was a man determined to make it right. Months after its opening, Unity Bistro received a letter from the regional council. It was an invitation to a ceremony recognizing the bistro as a model for community reconciliation. Olaf, Amal, and Ibrahim were all named as honorees. "I never thought I'd see the day," Olaf muttered, holding the invitation with shaking hands. "You earned this," Amal said gently. "We all did." As the ceremony approached, Harvik buzzed with excitement. But for Amal, Ibrahim, and Olaf, the journey wasn't about recognition. It was about proving that change, while difficult, was worth every step. The day of the regional council's recognition ceremony arrived with crisp air and clear skies. Harvik's residents turned out in droves, many of them standing in Unity Bistro's lot, waiting to cheer for their community leaders. Inside the bistro, Olaf stood in front of the mirror in his office, adjusting the unfamiliar suit jacket that Johan had convinced him to wear. His reflection felt foreign. He looked more like a guest at someone else's celebration than the owner of the restaurant. "Stop fussing," Johan said from the doorway. "You look fine." Olaf sighed. "This isn't exactly my scene." "It's not about you," Johan replied. "It's about what this place has become." The ceremony was held in the town square, where a temporary stage had been erected. Amal, Ibrahim, and Olaf sat side by side as the council members spoke about the importance of Unity Bistro and its impact on the community. When Olaf's name was called, there was a brief pause before he stood. The applause was polite but not unanimous. Even now, some people remained skeptical of his transformation. Olaf stepped up to the microphone, cleared his throat, and looked out over the crowd. "I never thought I'd be standing here," he began. His voice was steady, but there was a vulnerability that silenced the murmurs in the audience. "Not because I don't believe in Unity Bistro, far from it, but because I didn't think anyone would believe in me." The crowd stilled, his words hanging heavy in the air. "For years, I let fear and ignorance guide my actions. I clung to a past I didn't fully understand, and in doing so, I hurt people, good people, who had every right to be here just like me." He glanced at Ibrahim, who offered him a nod of encouragement. "It wasn't easy to face what I'd done, but people like Ibrahim and Amal didn't just hold up a mirror to my mistakes. They gave me a chance to do better. And that's what this bistro is about. It's about second chances, about building something together that none of us could do alone." There was a pause, then a ripple of applause that grew into a standing ovation. Even those who had doubted Olaf found themselves moved. As the ceremony wound down, a man in his late 60s approached Olaf. His graying hair and lined face carried the weight of years, but his eyes were sharp and piercing. "Olaf Lindström," the man said, extending a hand. "That's me," Olaf replied, shaking it warily. The man smiled faintly. "You don't remember me, do you?" "I can't say I do. I'm Erik Halvorsen," the man said. "Your father and I were friends. I was there the night we laid the first stone for the original Olaf's grill." Olaf's eyes widened. "You knew my father?" Erik nodded. "Better than most. And I can tell you this, he'd be proud of what you've done here." Over the next few months, Unity Bistro's influence spread far beyond Harvik. Articles about the diner appeared in regional newspapers and online platforms, praising it as a model for community reconciliation. Requests began pouring in from neighboring towns for advice on how to replicate the bistro's success. Amal found herself traveling to speak at events, sharing the story of Unity Bistro and the transformation it had sparked. Meanwhile, back in Harvik, Olaf found his role evolving. He was no longer just a chef. He had become a mentor to the bistro's young staff, many of whom were immigrants or from underrepresented communities. Teaching them the skills of the kitchen gave him a renewed sense of purpose. One morning, Amal opened her email to find a message from an international organization that focused on social cohesion and reconciliation. They had heard about Unity Bistro and wanted Amal, Ibrahim, and Olaf to speak at their annual summit in Geneva. Amal read the email twice, her heart racing. When she shared the news with her father and Olaf, their reactions were markedly different. "Ibrahim," Olaf said, running a hand through his graying hair. "Geneva? I'm a cook, not a speaker." "You're more than that now," Ibrahim replied with a smile. "And if we've learned anything through this, it's that sometimes stepping out of your comfort zone leads to the greatest growth." In Geneva, the three of them found themselves on a stage far grander than anything they could have imagined. The room was filled with leaders, activists, and visionaries from across the globe. Amal began, recounting the incident at Olaf's Grill and how it had set the transformation into motion. Ibrahim spoke next, sharing his perspective as a veteran and a community member who had chosen forgiveness over anger. Finally, Olaf stepped up to the microphone. "I used to think tradition meant staying the same, holding on to the past at all costs," he began. "But I've learned that real tradition, real legacy, is about building something that lasts. And the only way to do that is together." When he finished, the room erupted into applause. Back in Harvik, Unity Bistro continued to thrive. The summit had brought international attention to their small town, but within the walls of the bistro, it was the simple moments that mattered most. An immigrant child proudly sharing their family's recipe, an elderly local laughing with someone they once feared, Olaf teaching a young cook the perfect way to sear a steak. One evening, as the bistro wound down for the night, Olaf, Amal, and Ibrahim sat together at a table by the mural. The warmth of the space surrounded them, a tangible reminder of how far they had come. "We've done something good here," Olaf said quietly. "We've only just started," Amal replied, a spark of determination in her eyes. "And that's the best part," Ibrahim added with a smile. As they sat together, the sounds of laughter and conversation filled the air. Harvik was no longer a town divided, it was a town rebuilt, one meal at a time. Months after the Geneva summit, Unity Bistro's impact continued to ripple outward. Harvik, once a quiet town with its share of divisions, was now a symbol of reconciliation and progress. Tourists came not just for the food but to see how a small diner had sparked meaningful change. But for Olaf, Ibrahim, and Amal, the work was far from over. Each day brought new challenges, new opportunities, and new stories that reminded them why they had begun this journey. One crisp autumn afternoon, as the bistro buzzed with its usual energy, a man in a wheelchair entered the dining room. His presence was unassuming, but his face was unmistakable. It was Erik Halvorsen, the friend of Olaf's father who had visited the grand opening ceremony. Olaf approached him with a warm smile. "Erik, back so soon?" Erik chuckled. "I couldn't stay away, but this time, I brought something for you." From his lap, Erik pulled out a weathered photo album. The leather cover was cracked with age, and the pages inside were filled with black and white photographs. "These," Erik said, opening the album, "are memories of your father. I thought you might like to see the man I knew." Olaf hesitated, his hand hovering over the album before turning the first page. The photographs told a story Olaf had never known. His father standing shoulder to shoulder with immigrants, sharing meals and working together to build the diner's foundation. "This is..." Olaf's voice broke, and he cleared his throat. "This isn't the man I remember." Erik placed a hand on Olaf's arm. "People are complicated, Olaf. Your father had his flaws, but he believed in unity more than you think. That's why I know he'd be proud of what you've done." Olaf nodded, his grip on the album tightening. It was a moment of quiet redemption, a piece of the puzzle falling into place. The bistro had begun to inspire more than just its patrons. Nearby towns had started their own versions of Unity Bistro, each tailored to their unique communities. But one evening, Amal received a call that hinted at something much larger. The voice on the other end was that of Dr. Elena Stein, a renowned sociologist who had attended their Geneva presentation. "Amal," she began, her tone brisk but warm, "your story has sparked an idea, and I need your help to bring it to life." "What kind of idea?" Amal asked, intrigued. "A network," Dr. Stein replied. "A global initiative to create spaces like Unity Bistro, places that foster reconciliation and understanding in divided communities. I want you, Ibrahim, and Olaf to be the ambassadors." Amal's breath caught. The idea was ambitious, but it felt like the natural next step. "We'd be honored," Amal said. Over the next year, the Unity Network began to take shape. Working with Dr. Stein, Amal and her team traveled to cities and villages around the world, sharing their model and helping communities create their own spaces for unity. In some places, it was a cafe built in the ruins of a war-torn town. In others, it was a market stall that served food from both sides of a long-standing feud. Each project carried the spirit of Unity Bistro while reflecting the unique stories of its community. For Olaf, stepping onto the world stage was surreal. But as he taught cooking classes in refugee camps and shared meals with people whose lives were worlds apart from his own, he began to understand the true power of what they had created. "This isn't just about food," he told a group of chefs in a workshop one evening. "It's about the table. When people sit together, barriers fall. And that's when real change begins." The announcement came on a quiet morning. Amal was in the bistro's office going through emails when she saw it, a formal letter with the seal of the Nobel Committee. The headline was simple yet overwhelming. "Nomination for the Nobel Peace Prize, Unity Bistro Team for Global Efforts in Reconciliation and Community Building." Her hands trembled as she read the letter, then ran out to the dining room where Olaf and Ibrahim were working. "We've been nominated," she said, breathless. "For what?" Olaf asked, puzzled. "For the Nobel Peace Prize," she replied, her voice filled with disbelief. The room fell silent as the weight of her words sank in. Olaf was the first to break the quiet with a laugh. "Well, I didn't see that coming." Ibrahim smiled warmly. "It's not about the prize," he said. "It's about what it means. For Harvik. For everyone who's been part of this." On the evening of the announcement, the bistro hosted a gathering. It wasn't a celebration of the nomination itself, but of the journey that had led them there. Old and new friends filled the space, sharing food, laughter, and stories. Gerda Lund regaled a group of children with tales of Harvik's history, while Johan teased Olaf about his newfound fame. In the corner, Amal sat with Ibrahim, her head resting on his shoulder. "Do you think this is what you dreamed of, Baba?" she asked softly. "I never dared to dream this big," Ibrahim admitted. "But it's better than anything I could have imagined." As the night wound down, Olaf stood by the mural, his eyes lingering on the figures of his father and Ibrahim. Johan approached, clapping him on the shoulder. "Not bad for an old diner, huh?" Olaf chuckled. "Not bad at all." The bistro had become more than a place to eat. It was a living testament to what could happen when people chose unity over division, forgiveness over bitterness. And while the journey was far from over, one thing was certain. Unity Bistro had changed Harvik and the world forever. Years passed, and Unity Bistro remained the beating heart of Harvik. The town that once struggled with division was now a beacon of hope for communities across the globe. The bistro's impact had extended far beyond its walls, inspiring countless projects under the Unity Network, each one a testament to the power of reconciliation. The Nobel Peace Prize ceremony was held in Oslo, a grand event that felt surreal to Amal, Ibrahim, and Olaf. As they stepped onto the stage, the applause was thunderous, a standing ovation that seemed to echo the voices of everyone who had been touched by their journey. Amal spoke first, her voice steady but filled with emotion. Unity Bistro began as a response to pain, a moment of prejudice that could have divided us forever. But it became something much greater, a reminder that even the deepest wounds can heal when we come together. Ibrahim followed, his words carrying the weight of a lifetime's experiences. "In my years as a soldier, I saw how easy it was for humanity to destroy itself. But this project, this table, showed me how simple acts of connection can rebuild what seemed lost. It is proof that peace is not beyond our reach. Finally, Olaf stepped forward. He hesitated, his hands gripping the edges of the podium. "I never thought I'd be here," he began, his voice quiet but firm. "I was the one who caused the pain, who built the walls instead of tearing them down. But people believed in me even when I didn't deserve it. That belief changed me, and if I can change, anyone can." The applause that followed was filled with more than just admiration. It was filled with hope. When the trio returned to Harvik, the entire town gathered to greet them. Children waved banners, musicians played in the square, and the aroma of Unity Bistro's signature dishes filled the air. That evening, the bistro hosted its largest dinner yet. The tables stretched from the bistro's entrance out into the streets, forming a long, unbroken line. Residents and visitors from all walks of life shared meals and stories, their laughter blending into a single harmonious melody. Olaf, Amal, and Ibrahim stood together, watching the scene unfold. "This," Olaf said quietly, "is what my father would have wanted." Amal smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "And it's just the beginning." Years later, a plaque was mounted on the wall of Unity Bistro. It read, "This table brought a town together." It reminded us that our differences are not barriers but bridges, and that the simple act of sharing a meal can heal even the deepest wounds. May it inspire others to do the same, one conversation, one meal, one connection at a time. The mural, now iconic, had grown to include new figures, children playing, elders laughing, and a globe in the background symbolizing the bistro's far-reaching influence. Amal continued to lead the Unity Network, traveling the world and sharing the story of Harvik. Ibrahim remained the steady presence at the bistro, welcoming guests with a warmth that felt like home. And Olaf? He became the unexpected face of change, a reminder that even the most unlikely people could become champions for unity. As the sun set over Harvik, casting its golden glow over Unity Bistro, the hum of conversation and the clink of plates filled the air. It was a sound of hope, of progress, and of a future built not on division, but on togetherness. The table was set, the work continued, and the world was better for it.
Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel so we can keep bringing you the best stories.